Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, January 28th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 70.1 degrees, with a low of 56.2, so expect a mild winter day perfect for getting outdoors. Coming up, we'll examine the factors that made the deadliest U.S. aviation disaster in decades completely avoidable and explore California's move to align with the World Health Organization's Global Health Initiative after the U.S. pulled out. Plus, other stories on international tensions, local innovations, and more. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. The NTSB has now delivered its final word on that catastrophic mid-air collision over the Potomac last year, and the findings are pretty devastating for the entire aviation system. Ethan, bring us up to speed. What is this report, and why does it matter today?
Grace, this is the National Transportation Safety Board's final report on the collision that happened the night of January 29, 2025, just south of Reagan National. It was the deadliest aviation disaster on American soil since the September 11th attacks, killing all 67 people on the regional jet and the Army Black Hawk helicopter. NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy said this was not one bad call or one careless pilot, but, quote, deep, underlying systemic failures, end quote, throughout how that airspace is designed and run. According to NPR and ABC News, she also called the crash, quote, 100% preventable, end quote.
When the board says systemic failures, what exactly did they find went wrong?
The board spent a year digging through nearly 19,000 pages of evidence, everything from radar returns to cockpit voice recorders, and wrapped it into a report that runs more than 500 pages. They concluded this crash was created by overlapping weaknesses in airspace design, malfunctioning or missing equipment, strained air traffic control, and lacks oversight by both the Federal Aviation Administration and the Army. Homendy told reporters this was, quote, one failure after another that aligned to create the conditions, end quote, for disaster. And the board responded by unanimously approving nearly 50 safety recommendations yesterday here in Washington.
Let's slow it down and talk about the night itself. What actually happened in those final minutes over the river?
Around 8:48 that evening, the PSA-operated American Airlines regional jet was finishing a river visual approach to runway 33, threading along the Potomac in murky, low-visibility conditions. At the same time, the Black Hawk from the 12th Aviation Battalion at Fort Belvoir was flying what's known as Route 4, a low-level helicopter corridor along the river using night vision goggles under visual flight rules. Investigators say the helicopter's main rotor sliced into the underside of the jet's left wing at roughly 300 feet above the water, shattering both aircraft and sending them into the river. According to the NTSB's Bryce Banning, divers and cranes later pulled up about 90% of the wreckage, including a mud-covered teddy bear from the jet, which Homendy described as a haunting reminder of the human cost.
You mentioned that cost. Who was on board those aircraft? And how are families processing these findings a year later?
On the jet, 60 passengers and 4 crew members were killed, and on the Black Hawk, all 3 crew members died. ABC News has reported that 28 of those passengers were part of a figure skating group headed to a competition, so you had teenagers, coaches, and parents all traveling together. Families who packed into the hearing room yesterday told NPR that hearing the words 100% preventable was both validating and enraging. They see this report as proof that their loved ones were failed by a system, not just by one person's mistake.
A lot of the focus has been on the airspace around Reagan National. What did the board say about how that area is actually laid out?
This is one of the most congested, tightly controlled pieces of airspace in the country, and yet you had a helicopter corridor skimming along at or below 200 feet, while jets on final to runway 33 could be as low as about 75 feet above that corridor. According to NPR's Joel Rose, that is far tighter than the usual separation we expect in busy Class B airspace, which is measured in hundreds of feet vertically and more than a mile laterally. Controllers had been warning informally for years that you could have as little as 75 feet between a low helicopter and a descending airliner. The NTSB essentially said the system was designed to let aircraft operate in what became a permanent near-miss environment.
And this wasn't a surprise to the data, was it? Investigators talked about thousands of close calls that came before this crash.
Right, and this is where the board really leaned on the FAA's own databases. Using analysis tools called Aviation and ARIA, NTSB staff pulled more than 15,214 so-called close proximity events between October 2021 and December 2024, all involving commercial jets on instruments and helicopters flying visually in that corridor. Most of those were routine passes that were technically legal, but far tighter than anyone would design from scratch. Within that pile, though, they found 85 serious cases where aircraft got closer than about 1 nautical mile laterally and 200 feet vertically, and they documented that traffic alert systems in cockpits had been issuing collision warnings at least once a month since 2011. As ABC News pointed out, the board's frustration is that the FAA had all of this in-house and still did not rework the routes before 67 people died.
So why did the FAA not act sooner if its own systems were flashing red like that?
According to ABC's reporting, part of the answer is plain bureaucracy. Internal recommendations bounced around for years, and any change to helicopter routes around Washington can stir political pushback from agencies that rely on them. The NTSB also called out what it bluntly labeled a flawed safety culture, where some FAA employees feared retaliation if they raised too many concerns about entrenched procedures. Jennifer Holmandy said, quote, "The data was there," end quote, but it was not being mined or acted on. One board member, Michael Graham, told the NBC affiliate WNDU that their job now is not to pin blame on individual workers, but to make sure the system that failed those 67 people never fails like that again.
Beyond the airspace map, the helicopter itself had some serious equipment issues, didn't it?
It did, and those problems made an already tight situation worse. Post-crash test flights on sister aircraft showed that the Blackhawk's barometric and radio altimeters were reading 80 to 100 feet lower than the helicopter's real altitude, which means the crew believed they were at the required 200-foot ceiling when they were in reality closer to 300 feet. The Army had known about that altimeter issue in certain UH-60 Lima models, according to the NTSB's technical staff. On top of that, the helicopter's ADS-B transponder, the device that broadcasts an aircraft's position, was inoperative, and a federal rule at the time allowed military crews to switch that system off for what was called operational security.
And what about the jet? There's been a lot of talk about a relatively cheap device that might have saved everyone.
The regional jet was equipped with ADS-B out, meaning it was sending its position to the ground, but it did not have ADS-B in, which would have let the pilot see nearby traffic on a cockpit screen. Homendy told ABC News that a roughly $400 GPS-style unit could have given the jet's crew a collision alert 59 seconds before impact, and the Blackhawk's crew 48 seconds before, enough time for evasive action. The NTSB has recommended mandating ADS-B in for nearly 2 decades, issuing 17 separate calls since about 2006. But the FAA consistently said the costs and certification hurdles, especially for older jets like the CRJ-700, outweighed the benefits. Instead, the agency leaned on radar and voice communication with controllers, and that layer alone did not hold up that night.
Given all that, were the pilots in any position to just see and avoid each other on their own?
The board's simulations suggest it would have been very difficult. The Black Hawk crew was wearing night vision goggles, which are great for seeing ground features, but tunnel your vision and shrink peripheral awareness. In the simulator, the jet's lights appeared as a faint magenta dot that blinked in and out on the edge of the right seat pilot's view. From the jet's cockpit, investigators say the helicopter would have been essentially invisible against the dark river until literally the final second, and the cockpit voice recorder captures one pilot exclaiming, quote, "Oh," end quote, and then, quote, "Oh, end quote, right before impact. The NTSB concluded that even well-trained crews can lose situational awareness when they are relying on visual separation inside a badly designed traffic pattern.
We also heard air traffic control was overloaded that night. How did controller staffing and workload factor into this?
In the Reagan Tower, a single local controller was handling both the main airport frequency and the helicopter frequency for about 4 hours straight, which had become the standard practice during slower overnight periods. But in the 90 seconds before the collision, that one person was juggling 12 different aircraft, 7 jets and 5 helicopters, according to the NTSB's timeline. The controller approved what is called visual separation after the helicopter crew said they had the jet in sight, but it turned out they were actually looking at a different airplane lining up for runway 1. A conflict alert on the tower radar popped 26 seconds before impact, yet no safety alert was issued, and supervisors did not step in to split the workload, in part because one was distracted with paperwork and another had not fully absorbed how many helicopters were in the mix.
There were also some issues with what people actually heard on the radios, right? Especially around the word circling.
Exactly, and those little details matter in a complex pattern. Less than 2 minutes before the collision, the tower told the Black Hawk that the jet was, quote, circling to runway 33, end quote. But the NTSB's audio analysis suggests the word circling may have been clipped or lost in static. If the helicopter crew heard only to runway 33, they might have pictured the jet on a more straightforward path, not looping along the river in front of them. NPR's coverage highlighted how these small communication breakdowns, piled on top of overwork and poor airspace design, eroded the safety margins that normally protect everyone.
After laying all this out yesterday, what are the biggest changes the NTSB is now pushing for?
The board adopted close to 50 recommendations, many of them aimed squarely at the FAA. They want ADS-B in, mandated for all aircraft that already have to carry ADS-B, out. They want the collision avoidance computers in airliners to issue resolution advisories down to about 300 feet, instead of cutting out at 900. And they want helicopter routes shifted away from runway approach paths whenever possible. They also urged beefed-up training and staffing so a single controller is not working such a complex picture for hours, tighter limits on the use of visual separation in busy Class B airspace, and more rigorous testing of altimeters. For the Army, the board recommended equipping all UH-60 helicopters with ADS-B and sharing close call data with the FAA so these patterns can be spotted sooner.
How has the FAA responded so far to those new recommendations, especially given the criticism in the report?
In statements to NPR and ABC News, the agency has been careful and a bit guarded. Officials said they respect the NTSB's work and have already taken some urgent steps, pointing back to changes they rushed through in March of last year, closing the most hazardous stretch of Route 4 from Haines Point down to the Wilson Bridge for routine helicopter traffic, trimming Reagan's hourly arrival cap from 36 flights to 30 with a goal of 26, and boosting tower staffing to 22 fully certified controllers plus 8 trainees. Those fixes, the FAA argues, show it can move quickly when risks are crystal clear. But when it comes to the fresh recommendations approved yesterday, the agency has only promised to, quote, carefully and diligently consider, end quote, them, without committing to deadlines, and that cautious language is drawing criticism from safety advocates who fear another cycle of delay.
There's also a legal and financial side to this. Where do the lawsuits stand now that this final report is public?
The central case is called Crafton versus American Airlines and others, filed under the Federal Tort Claims Act and now consolidating dozens of wrongful death suits in federal court here in Washington. It is currently scheduled for a tentative trial in April of 2027 before Judge Ana Reyes. Families are alleging negligence by the federal government for understaffed and overburdened air traffic control and for ignoring more than 15,000 proximity events, as well as by American and its regional partner for not providing better training on the peculiar risks of Reagan's river approaches. There is also talk of product liability claims involving the helicopter and jet manufacturers over altimeter and collision avoidance gaps. In December, the Justice Department quietly admitted partial liability on the Army's side, and legal experts interviewed by the Washington Post say total settlements could exceed $1 billion, especially now that the NTSB has pinned probable cause on unsafe route design and loss of situational awareness.
How is Congress reacting? We've heard about the Rotor Act and new pressure on Reagan's already controversial schedule.
On Capitol Hill, the Senate already passed a bill called the Rotor Act late last year, which would require military aircraft operating in civilian airspace to keep their ADS-B systems on, with narrow exceptions. Senator Ted Cruz, who chairs the Commerce Committee, is urging the House to move that bill quickly in light of the NTSB findings, though House Transportation Chair Sam Graves is promising a thorough review before he brings it up. Virginia Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine went further yesterday, calling in a joint statement reported by ABC News for immediate passage of Rotor and deeper cuts to flight slots at Reagan, saying the airport is part of a, quote, overstretched system, end quote. The FAA, for its part, rolled out a so-called Flight Plan 2026 reorganization on the same day, promising to streamline safety oversight, but lawmakers are waiting to see what that means in practice.
Some people have questioned that headline figure of more than 15,000 close proximity events. Is the sky over Washington really that dangerous?
NTSB's staff went out of their way to clarify that point after the hearing, including in interviews cited by Flying Magazine. They said the 15,000 number is a broad proximity count that captures almost every time a jet on instruments and a helicopter under visual rules passed within about 1 mile horizontally and 400 feet vertically in that corridor, many of which were legal and expected, given how the routes were drawn. In other words, it reflects the exposure built into the system, not 15,000 near collisions somehow swept under the rug. The real warning lights, investigators say, were the 85 serious cases that busted even generous visual flight buffers and those monthly cockpit collision alerts going back more than a decade.
With the anniversary of the crash coming up tomorrow, what are the bigger lessons here, and what should listeners be watching for next?
This report lays bare how hard it can be to mix military and civilian traffic safely in cramped airspace when you rely too heavily on people, seeing and avoiding each other, instead of building in technological and structural buffers. Homendy has said in several interviews, including with NPR, that she is prepared to fight for these changes for years, just as the board once pushed for train safety systems until Congress finally acted. Over the coming months, we will see whether the FAA turns yesterday's recommendations into firm rules, whether the Army changes how it trains near cities, and whether Congress is willing to reduce flights into a prized but crowded downtown airport. For the families of the 67 people who died, the hope is that this painful accounting will translate into lasting reforms so no one else has to pay the same price for bureaucratic inertia.
A sobering investigation, and a lot still to watch. Ethan, thank you for walking us through it. California is stepping onto the world stage in a pretty unusual way this week. Chloe, what exactly did Governor Newsom just do in Davos?
Grace, late last week in Davos, at the World Economic Forum, Governor Gavin Newsom announced that California has independently joined a World Health Organization network called the Global Outbreak Alert and Response Network, or GOARN. Reuters, in a piece titled, quote, California joins UN Health Network following U.S. departure from WHO, end quote, says this makes California the first U.S. state ever to sign on directly. The announcement came just one day after the Trump administration formally completed the United States' withdrawal from the World Health Organization. So you had Washington walking out on Thursday and California walking in on Friday.
Let's back up there. Why did the Trump administration pull the U.S. out of the WHO in the first place?
That move has been building for about a year. According to The Guardian, President Trump started the withdrawal process on his first day in office back in January 2025, blaming what he called WHO mismanagement of the COVID pandemic, lack of transparency, and overreach. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. led the charge, saying the U.S. should, quote, chart its own course, end quote, through bilateral health deals and a new America First global health program. In a joint statement last Thursday, The Guardian reports, they accused the WHO of abandoning its core mission and vowed to prioritize American institutions over international entanglements.
So if Washington has officially cut ties, how is California able to slide in here without federal approval?
The key is that California is not joining the World Health Organization as a country. It is joining a specific technical network the WHO runs. GOARN is set up as a partnership of institutions, not a club of nations, and NPR notes its rules focus on whether an applicant has public health expertise, not what flag it flies. The California Department of Public Health applied as a not-for-profit technical agency, signed a letter of agreement with the WHO, and was approved by GOARN's 21-member steering committee, which includes groups like Doctors Without Borders and, historically, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Official WHO documents, cited by outlets like the Global Times, say subnational bodies can join regardless of their national government's membership status, so they do not need the State Department's blessing.
For people who have never heard of it, what is GOARN, and what does it actually do day to day?
GOARN was created around the year 2000 after serious coordination failures during the early SARS era to make sure countries and labs could spot and respond to outbreaks together. According to NPR's health reporter Gabrielle Emanuel, it now links more than 350 partners worldwide, from hospitals and universities to public health agencies and non-governmental organizations. The network runs weekly teleconferences, pushes out rapid outbreak updates, and uses a system called Epidemic Intelligence from Open Sources, or EIOS, which constantly scans global news, social media, and open data for unusual disease signals. When something like Ebola, MPOX, or a new flu strain pops up, GOARN helps verify the threat, coordinate expert deployments, and share what is working in real time.
And California only joined a few days ago. How quickly is the state actually plugging into those tools?
California has moved fast. State epidemiologist Dr. Erica Pan told NPR that the California Department of Public Health completed its onboarding by this week, so as of this morning, staff are already dialing into the weekly GOARN calls, which for them start at 5 a.m. Pacific time. They are beginning training on that EIOS platform, so California analysts can see early warning signals alongside colleagues in Europe, Africa, and Asia, rather than waiting for filtered reports. Dr. Pan says this is especially important right now because there is no national flu vaccination campaign this season, and federal surveillance has been scaled back, leaving gaps California is trying to fill.
What does California say it is getting here? That it could not just get through universities or private partners already in the network.
State officials argue this gives California direct, institutional access, instead of relying on a patchwork of academic partners to share what they hear. Reuters reports that Newsom framed it as a critical safeguard, saying California needs its own pipeline to early data and expertise when a new virus is spreading overseas. A nonprofit called Haluna Health, which works closely with California and local health departments, wrote in a LinkedIn post that GOARN membership supports data-driven programs and workforce development, especially for underserved communities, and they cheered the move with the line, quote, "Here's to deeper global collaboration and better health for all," end quote. NPR also quotes Dr. Pan, saying the partnership fills federal voids and lets California respond faster to borderless threats like pandemics, rather than waiting for Washington to re-engage.
We have seen California make other independent public health moves over the last year or two. How does this decision fit into that bigger pattern?
It really builds on a broader California for All strategy. Last September, California helped form the West Coast Health Alliance with Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii to issue their own vaccine recommendations and not automatically defer to federal guidelines when the science seemed politicized. Then, in December, the state launched the Public Health Network Innovation Exchange, a kind of collaboration hub for health departments and research institutions. And this follows earlier steps like joining the AARP network of age-friendly states and communities in June 2021, so there is a consistent pattern of California saying, if Washington steps back, we will step forward.
If California is stepping forward, the White House sounds like it thinks the state has stepped over the line. What has the reaction been in Washington?
The response from the Trump administration has been pretty sharp. The Guardian and China.org.cn both report that White House spokesperson Anna Kelly dismissed Newsom's Davos speech as grandstanding and called California's move unconstitutional shadow diplomacy. The Health and Human Services Press Secretary, Emily G. Hilliard, told reporters that California's involvement, quote, does not affect U.S. policy, end quote, and insisted states do not set American foreign policy. The State Department has also stressed to NPR that the United States, as a nation, will not be participating in regular WHO-led or managed events, including GOARN.
Let's talk about that constitutional question a little more. Legally, do critics have a case that California is overstepping its authority here?
Critics point to the Constitution's Compact Clause, which says states cannot enter agreements with foreign powers without Congress's consent, and to the so-called one-voice doctrine, which the Supreme Court reaffirmed in a 2003 case called American Insurance Association v. Garamendi. In that case, the court slapped down a California law dealing with Holocaust-era insurance claims because it conflicted with federal foreign policy. The Guardian notes that some legal scholars and administration officials see GOARN membership as the same kind of problem, arguing that even a technical health agreement sends a foreign policy signal. California counters that this is not a treaty or trade pact, but a public health collaboration well within the traditional powers of states, and WHO guidance backs that up by describing GOARN as a technical partnership of institutions rather than a diplomatic body.
You mentioned the State Department saying the U.S. will not be part of WHO events. How much American presence is left in this network after the federal agencies walked away?
According to the Global Times, WHO officials say federal agencies like the CDC and the National Institutes of Health have paused their GOARN participation since the U.S. withdrawal took effect last week. But many American universities and hospitals never left, because they are independent partners in their own right. Policy experts told NPR that institutions like Johns Hopkins University, Emory University, and Harvard's Public Health School remain active GOARN participants, which means American scientists are still in the room even if federal officials are not. California becomes the first state government to sit there alongside them, but it is joining an existing American footprint rather than creating it from scratch.
So some critics say this is mostly symbolic, not a lifeline. What are they arguing, and how do supporters push back?
Brett Schaefer at the Conservative American Enterprise Institute told reporters this looks like an, quote, interesting but unclear, end quote, public relations play by Newsom. His point, which NPR relayed, is that American researchers are already gainfully plugged into GOARN, so it is not obvious how much extra benefit a state bureaucracy adds. On the other side, Duke University global health scholar Dr. Gavin Yami told NPR and The Guardian that it is actually a, quote, smart and savvy play, end quote, because it guarantees California direct access to life-saving data, even if future federal policy swings further toward isolation. Yami warns of what he calls a tragic divide in which states that join GOARN get timely intelligence, while those that stay out may be flying partly blind in the next crisis.
Speaking of other states, is anyone else actively following California's lead yet, or just quietly watching?
There are already signs of a ripple effect. Dr. Pan told NPR she has been in conversation with health officials in several states, and Illinois went public yesterday with a press release saying it is preparing its own GOARN application. Newsom is also a key member of the 15-state Governors Public Health Alliance, which has been coordinating around issues like vaccines and school safety, so there is an existing network of Democratic-leaning governors who could move in the same direction. Analysts talk about this as compensatory federalism, where blue states align with WHO standards while red states stick closer to the administration's Make America Healthy Again initiative, creating parallel public health universes inside one country.
That parallel universe idea sounds pretty stark. What could that split look like for ordinary Americans if it really takes hold?
Imagine one set of states getting early alerts about a new respiratory virus, updating their hospital protocols, and ordering vaccines as soon as they are available because they are plugged into GOARN's weekly calls. Meanwhile, another set of states might rely solely on whatever filtered information comes from federal channels or bilateral deals, which could arrive days or weeks later. Dr. Yami told The Guardian that in a pandemic, those timing differences translate directly into lives saved or lost. Supporters of California's move argue that if the federal government steps away from multilateral systems, states have almost a moral obligation to keep their residents connected.
Outside our borders, is California really breaking new ground? Or are there international examples of local agencies doing this already?
GOARN has always been more flexible than national membership in the World Health Organization. Partner lists show that Public Health England, for example, and Hong Kong's Department of Health have long participated as technical agencies without any drama. Several non-federal American institutions, like the University of Nebraska Medical Center, have also been partners since the network's early years around 2000. The Global Times acknowledges California is historically notable as the first U.S. state government in GOARN, but argues the word, quote, historic, end quote, is as much about American politics as it is about the network's everyday operations.
How has the World Health Organization itself reacted to bringing in a U.S. state just days after losing the U.S. federal government?
In Davos, Reuters reports WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus publicly welcomed California and highlighted the crucial role cities and states play in global health security. In California's own press materials, state officials say Tedros stressed that GOARN's current strategy from 2022 through 2026 is all about broadening that technical base, not shrinking it. WHO's technical pages emphasize that what matters is capacity in areas like epidemiology, lab diagnostics, and risk communication, and that partners must be not-for-profit and willing to deploy staff, not that they speak for a national government. So from Geneva's perspective, California looks like another capable node in a decentralized network, even if the symbolism is huge in U.S. politics.
Speaking of symbolism, what does this mean for Governor Newsom personally, especially with people already talking about 2028?
Politically, this reinforces Newsom's image as a globalist foil to Trump's America First approach. The Global Times suggested that while the technical impact may be modest compared to universities already in GOARN, the move clearly positions Newsom as a defender of multilateralism and could boost his credentials for a potential presidential run in 2028. Reuters notes that making this announcement in Davos, flanked by international leaders, was no accident. It frames California as almost a quasi-country on climate and now on health. Supporters see a governor stepping up to protect his residents, while critics see a politician auditioning on the world stage.
Bringing it back home, if you are just waking up in Los Angeles or Fresno, how might you actually feel the effects of this decision?
In the short term, most Californians will not notice anything dramatic like a new card in their wallet or a different vaccine schedule tomorrow. Over time, health officials say the benefits will show up in more subtle ways: earlier alerts about outbreaks overseas that change how hospitals prepare, faster access to evidence about which treatments are working, and more targeted help for communities that usually get missed. Groups like Haluna Health argue that this kind of global connectivity makes it easier to design programs that actually reach farm workers, unhoused residents, and seniors. So the payoff is less about a single headline and more about resilience when the next big health scare hits.
And for people living outside California, what are the big things you are watching over the next few weeks?
I am watching 3 fronts. First, whether more governors, especially in that 15-state alliance, announce their own GOARN applications, which would deepen that blue-red split on health policy. Second, whether the Trump administration tries to challenge California in court under the Compact Clause or the One Voice Doctrine, which would test just how far states can go in this kind of subnational diplomacy. And third, whether Congress or future administrations move to re-engage with the WHO, because California has now ensured that even in an era of national retreat, at least one big American player still has a seat at the global health table.
A major shift in how America shows up, or does not, in global health. Chloe, thanks for breaking it down for us.
You are welcome, Grace. It is a fascinating story, and it is unfolding in real time.
Here are some other headlines. A leaked Department of Energy memo signals a nuclear about-face, rolling back the long time, as low as reasonably achievable. Radiation standard in favor of a faster, risk-informed path to new reactors. Energy Secretary Chris Wright has green-lit reforms meant to turbocharge advanced nuclear plants to feed power-hungry AI data centers, now labeled a national security priority. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission is rewriting its Part 53 licensing rules and stretching design certifications from 15 to 40 years, hoping to cut red tape as well as ribbon. Industry allies say this could light the way for climate and energy security, while watchdogs warn it erodes a safety culture decades in the making. The Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board is already flagging delays in a new nuclear safety order for defense sites, even as the administration races to have 3 advanced reactors up and running by July 4, 2026, with broader rule changes due early that year. In public health, vaccine policy is now a viral conflict at the top. CDC Director Susan Monarez has been fired after refusing to carry out what her attorneys call unscientific, reckless directives from Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. At issue, a January 5 shakeup of the childhood immunization schedule that stripped universal recommendations from 6 vaccines, including COVID-19, flu, and hepatitis shots, pushing them into a murky, shared clinical decision-making zone. The move has triggered a dose of dissent. At least 4 senior CDC officials, among them Chief Medical Officer Deborah Howery, have resigned. The American Academy of Pediatrics has published its own independent schedule, and a federal court has cleared the way for major medical groups to sue. With the U.S. officially withdrawn from the World Health Organization as of January 22, 2026, critics say America's public health system is going off-label just as it loses its global second opinion. The doomsday clock has ticked even closer to catastrophe, now set at 85 seconds to midnight, the most ominous readout since its creation. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists cites a sharp downturn in global security, from normalized nuclear saber-rattling and fraying arms control treaties to the looming expiration of the last major U.S.-Russia strategic pact, raising fears of an arms race set to run away rather than run down. Add in unregulated military AI, emerging biological threats, and climate promises melting faster than polar ice, and experts warn the margin for error is now measured in seconds, not decades. On the domestic pocketbook front, Medicare is trying to make Big Pharma less of a hard pill to swallow. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services has named 15 high-cost drugs for the third round of price negotiations, for the first time roping in Part B medications given in clinics alongside familiar Part D prescriptions. The list includes HIV blockbuster Biktarvy, diabetes drug Trulicity, and even Botox, smoothing out costs as well as wrinkles. These medicines drove about $27 billion in Medicare spending for 1.8 million enrollees. Companies have until February 28 to sign on, with negotiations wrapping November 1, 2026, and new prices taking effect January 1, 2028. This comes as the first negotiated prices from an earlier batch hit pharmacy counters, and a $2.100 annual cap on Part D out-of-pocket costs kicks in, giving seniors financial relief without a prescription for sticker shock. And finally, a federal hiring drive is under fire for courting the far right. A $100 million wartime recruitment campaign by Immigration and Customs Enforcement has been accused of echoing white nationalist messaging, using slogans like "One Homeland," "One People," "One Heritage," and a soundtrack favored in neo-Nazi circles. Internal documents describe geofenced ads at gun shows, NASCAR races, and UFC events, amplified by tactical and fitness influencers, all under the watch of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. The push explicitly seeks combat-hungry applicants to staff a 2026 mass deportation surge. Civil rights groups and whistleblowers say the 12,000 new recruits brought in under this banner have already coincided with an uptick in violent incidents and warrantless raids, while major platforms like Spotify are pulling the ads, warning that what's billed as law and order branding looks dangerously close to hate-based banding together. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with GPT-5, Gemini Pro 3, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.